Hi everyone, my name is Joshua McLaughlin. I'm currently a second year global media and communications student here at the University of Sussex, and I'm also one of your digital media gurus. Today I'm going to be interviewing Alison Phipps. She's a gender studies professor at the School of Law, Politics and Sociology. And basically I'm just going to be chatting to her about her book that's going to be released on April 6th called Me Not You, The Trouble with Mainstream Feminism. It's nice to have you, Alison.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you for being here, especially during these really troubling times anyway that are happening at the minute. I know we're all trapped in our homes and we would have preferred to do this in person, but since what we're going to be discussing about today is really important, it's best to carry on with it, is it not?
I think so. I think that this is the issues that we're talking about today and in the book are not going to go away. And some of them may be exacerbated by what's happening right now.
Within the book, it's basically its entire premise is based on the sort of intrinsic problems with movements such as the hashtag MeToo movement or any movements against sexual violence. How come you believe this is the case?
I think a lot of it is from experience, really. So I have been part of these movements myself. And I should say that the main thing I'm taking issue with is what would be called the mainstream movement against sexual violence. So Me Too, the hashtag, not necessarily Me Too, the program of work that was created by Tarana Burke, and Me Too, the hashtag, as it manifested in sort of mainstream online and social media, not Me Too, the hashtag, as it manifested in lots of alternative and marginalized spaces. Would you like me to talk about what I see the problems as being with this type of feminism?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so the thing I talk about in the book is called political whiteness, and this is something that I believe characterizes mainstream feminism and also other mainstream forms of politics which are dominated by privileged white people. And I say privileged white people because I think that political whiteness is often an expression of class privilege as well. It's not always, and being working class does not necessarily insulate you from being racist, but the types of politics that I'm talking about tend to be dominated by middle class and white people. And political whiteness, as I theorize it, has three main characteristics. The first is narcissism, and that is sort of understood broadly. So it's not necessarily a critique of the personalities of the women involved in mainstream feminism. It's more that the movement tends to focus on the experiences, the concerns, the views of middle-class white women to the exclusion of others. So that's what I mean by narcissism. The second one is a kind of alertness to threat, and that comes from being in a position of supremacy. So from being in a position of supremacy, one is naturally preoccupied with losing that position of supremacy. And that alertness to threat is baked into whiteness as a structural position, and you can see that throughout colonial history. So that's the second aspect of political whiteness, and of course that becomes even more relevant when we're talking about sexual violence. So there's a kind of threatened femininity which is at the heart of these movements, which in some ways is incredibly rational and sensible because women do live their lives under the threat of sexual violence. But what tends to happen is that the preoccupation around the threat to some women tends to take precedence over threats to others. And then the third thing is kind of going along with that is a sort of a will to power and a desire to control, whether that's through state means, so more police, more prisons, longer sentences, or whether that's through things like institutional discipline, so kind of naming and shaming, excluding perpetrators from institutions. And what that tends to do is to keep some women safe at the expense of others.
Touching on one of the aspects that you were just speaking about earlier, some voices may be heard more than others, especially on social media. To sort of play devil's advocate with that argument, if celebrities and high-profile individuals didn't raise the alarm about movements such as hashtag #MeToo within the first place, do you feel like it may have disenfranchised quieter voices such as the working class or people that identify within intersectionalized groups?
I'm going to say no, because
Okay.
I think that more marginalized groups have been undertaking activism around sexual violence long before privileged white women have gotten involved. I think that Me Too could have been a lot different if those celebrities had instead elevated the voices of those women and those groups, perhaps learned from them, and taken part in their struggle instead of making it about a fairly small group of elite women. I'm not saying that any survivor should keep quiet. But what I'm saying is that sometimes speaking out can be speaking over if you have social and cultural power. And I think that the people who get the credit for being the first to speak out are not normally the first to speak out. There's normally been many more people speaking out before that. It's just that nobody has been listening.
How would you say then that political whiteness, because you sort of frame this within the book as well, is shaping narratives of mainstream feminism and sexual violence?
I think that it shapes them really profoundly. I think that it kind of shapes the way that the movement stories are told. So one big underpinning assumption of mainstream feminism is that you can be a victim or a perpetrator, but not both. You're either one or the other. Another big assumption is that there are bad men in the world, and that the police exist to catch these men. So the police are not the bad men. The police exist to catch the bad men. The courts exist to judge the bad men, and that punishment works. And all of those, I think, are stories which are shaped by political whiteness and by a kind of a one-dimensional view of the world. Because as soon as we start to look intersectionally and look at things like class and race as well as gender, it becomes much more difficult to say that people are either victims or perpetrators and not both. If you just have gender, then you say women are victims, men are perpetrators, that's it. What we need to do is punish these bad men and everything will be fine. When you start to put class and race into the mix, then you start to ask different questions.
You've also done previous research before surrounding lad culture. Do you feel that any of that research is applicable to work that you've done within your book?
I think so. I think that research has given me a lot of insight into what happens in institutions. So why violence might be committed within institutions by particular types of men who have a lot of power, but also why institutions then cover up that violence because they are focused on protecting their brands above all else. So it's what I call institutional airbrushing. You kind of get rid of the blemish, but the underlying malaise sort of remains. So I think it's really helped me. And also through my research on lad culture, I have participated in mainstream feminism, in kind of feminism around sexual violence in universities. And there are a lot of amazing activists, amazing women and people of other genders in that movement. But also I have felt uneasy for quite some time about some of the strategies of that movement. And that's really where the book came from.
Have you faced any internal struggles in being a white woman that's a professor at a university, writing about these problems from your own perspective, instead of it maybe being from a more marginalized voice?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm uncomfortable with it. I'm uncomfortable being a white woman writing about whiteness because I don't want to be navel gazing. I don't want to be, Sarah Ahmed calls it performing a whiteness that's anxious about itself, but then seeing that as anti-racism rather than actually doing anti-racism.
It sounds existential.
Yeah, exactly. It does. But I also think that for me to sit around here kind of bemoaning the fact that I'm a white woman that's written this book about whiteness would also be to center myself. So I think I did write the book. I felt that I had to write the book, and I have just decided to kind of own that and move on. One thing I will say about the book is that women of color are cited in the book more than any other group. My analysis is very much grounded in feminism of color, and especially in Black feminism. And a lot of the ideas in it are not necessarily my own. They're other people's ideas that I have put together. And it's been my privilege to be able to put those together. But I hope that in the writing of the book, I have done those voices justice and uplifted those voices within my narrative and not tried to take credit for other people's ideas. So a lot of the things I say, I say in the book that this book is written for fellow white women, and it is, because women of colour don't need to know this stuff. They already know it. And one of the things that I hope my book will do is to take some of that burden off women of colour, who are kind of not only having to create all of the best theory in feminism, but they're also having to educate white women about whiteness all the time, constantly. So I kind of hope that if my book does anything, it will be kind of to say, here, go away and read this, and then come back and we can have a conversation. And I'm sure that there are women of colour who will hate my book for very, very valid reasons. And I think absolutely fair play, you're completely allowed to hate it. But the last thing I think I'll say on kind of writing about whiteness is that is what I'm writing about. I'm writing about whiteness. So I'm not claiming to know what it is like to be a person of colour. I'm very clear on that. I don't understand that. I haven't experienced it. What I do or try to understand and try to write about in the book is the systems of heteropatriarchy, racial capitalism, colonialism, that both produce sexual violence but also frame our politics around it, and that produce white supremacy and the positionality of whiteness. And that's what I'm writing about. So in that way, I have tried to stay in my own lane.
Thank you so much for this, by the way. Do you have any final comments that you'd like to express at all? Anything you'd like viewers to know? Where can they find you? Are you involved in any campaigns? Do you have social media?
I have social media. I only have Twitter, on which I'm at Alison Phipps. I will be doing other bits and pieces on the book as well. And I really, really hope that people enjoy it. And even if they don't, even if they hate it, I hope that it kind of provides some food for thought and helps people to have different types of discussions.
Great. Where can people find the book, by the way? So it comes out April 6th.
April 6th, you can pre-order it on the Manchester University Press website. You can also pre-order it at Blackwell's online, and there are a number of different independent bookshops that are stocking it as well. If you check my Twitter feed, I've got a thread there with links to the independent bookshops, and if you can support your local independent, then I think that would be a great thing to do. You can buy an ebook as well from Manchester University Press if you prefer ebooks, especially at the moment.
Great, fabulous. Thank you so much, Alison. Take care, stay safe, and we all look forward to reading your work.